I speak. Okay, first off, a few announcements. Like I said, Raphael Mudge will be here right after me. He wrote Armitage, a really cool GUI, and he's going to have you guys, a lot of the things with these cables is he's going to have you guys do some sort of team mode with Armitage. And other announcements, this class is held every Thursday at 8 and Saturday at 3. You only need to come to one. If ever you can't come to the Saturday meeting, you're welcome to come to the Thursday. We teach the same thing. Also, if you're away on a business trip for an entire week and you really can't come in, we do have a go-to meeting set up, which no one came in on this one, but we had 7 on Thursday, so it shares my screen and you can hear me, and if you have a microphone, you can also talk. But if you don't have a mic, you can ask questions in the chat. So that's also available to you if you can't make it to Reverse Space one week. Thank you all for coming. Does anybody have any questions before I begin? All right, well, I have a first question. Is anybody here a pen tester? Is anybody here? Okay. Does anybody know what a buffer overflow is? Okay, good. All right. This is my class on Thursday. Actually, we had to go through buffer overflow for everyone, and we will go through that a little bit, but I just like to get an idea of where we are. So acknowledgements before I begin. First off, the Metasploit team. We wouldn't have Metasploit without them. They do a great job keeping this. Yes, John, what? Yay mutts. Yeah, yay mutts, as John said. Also, offensive security. I guess yay mutts for that one too, right? And for Metasploit Unleashed, they wrote this free course for us, and this course is completely free. You don't have to pay me anything. You don't have to pay to be a member of Reverse Space to come to this class, but if you do enjoy it, we ask that you donate to Hackers for Charity. Even a small contribution will help feed children in Uganda, so if you like this course, donate to Johnny Long and Hackers for Charity. And thank you for letting us have this here, Reverse Space. So Carl and Tiffany, you rock, yay. So first off, who here has used Metasploit before? All right, a few people. This is actually interesting because Thursday I really had nobody, they were all basically no buffer overflow experience and no Metasploit experience. It seems like Saturday we have a lot of experience, so maybe you guys could help me teach some of the modules. Who knows? Well anyways, Metasploit is an exploitation framework. Kind of makes it a little easier. We'll go into that more, but it's for exploitation and also exploit development. Kind of gives you a leg up. It's Ruby based. I've heard that it's the largest Ruby framework thing in existence. I think that may not be true because I know that Rosetta Stone uses Ruby on Rails, so they might be bigger all in all, but definitely Metasploit is one of the bigger Ruby products.
The largest module for Ruby.
Largest module for Ruby? Okay, I think that would probably be accurate. Metasploit, the largest module for Ruby. So anybody here have Ruby experience? Okay, so we have one who has Ruby experience, but did you have Ruby experience before you started using Metasploit?
Yes.
Yes? Well, I did not, so you have one up on me. I had never done Ruby until I started writing in Metasploit, but we will look at writing modules for Metasploit, so you all get a little bit of Ruby experience before the course is over. But if you don't have any experience programming or in Ruby, then that's fine, because we will work to that point. Metasploit is modular, so you can develop your own module and hook it up into everything that's already there. You don't have to rewrite anything except your part. You can unload and load things as you please. And basically Metasploit is made up of a lot of modules. It has exploits, it has payloads, it has auxiliary modules like scanners and more. Pretty much anything you want to make it do, you can make it do. And it's open to the community to develop for it, so if there's something it doesn't do as we go through this course that you want to see it do, maybe that could be your first Metasploit module that you write yourself. Installing Metasploit. I really just have these. My answer is use Backtrack. A lot of you are using Backtrack out there, right? Yes, okay. Well, if you're not using Backtrack or you want to install it on a different box, I have links here on the slide. These slides will be up after the talk. So if you want to install it somewhere else, I just have links to where to install it. Windows has an installer. Linux, you install all of the dependencies. Same way with Mac. And Mac, you actually have to update the Ruby for it to work correctly. A little bit of terminology. Since we have some people with experience in here, some of this might be things you've already covered. An exploit is a vector for penetrating a system. If I see a vulnerable system out there, I need an exploit in order to exploit that system. Well named, I suppose. Payload is your shell code, what you want the exploit to do. Once you run an exploit, that's great, but if it doesn't do anything, it's not going to help you. So your payload is what happens after. Do you want a shell? Change somebody's background image to lolcats, all of that would be considered a payload. So also there's encoders that will encode or mangle your payload. If you're trying to get around antivirus, you might want to encode it. And there's auxiliary modules. Like I said, there's a lot of things like scanners and MySQL, things where it'll log in to MySQL. And again, that's a lot of people start out for developing for Metasploit by doing auxiliary, something it doesn't do already. I want to see it do that, so you add that in. And a session in Metasploit is a connection. It's from your attack box to the system that you've attacked, where you talk back and forth. And so that would be a session. So you exploit something, and then you have a session where you can communicate with the box. So an example. Some of you have some pen testing experience, right? So what do you do if you find a vulnerability? You've run Nessus on a box or some other vulnerability scanner, or you just see an open port and think it might be vulnerable. So what would you do? You'd go out and you'd find a public exploit, and then the exploit that you find might not be written exactly for the box you're trying to attack. For instance, what we're going to attack today is Windows XP Service Pack 2. But the exploit that we're going to use it wasn't just vulnerable on Windows XP Service Pack 2. It was vulnerable on all the Windows XP before that. It was vulnerable on Windows 2000 and 2003. So that would take different exploits in terms of your offsets, like your return address. Those of you who are familiar with buffer overflow, you know, basically it's a buffer and you put information in it, but you put too much information in it and it goes out this way. And things like your return address, which is what instruction is going to be executed by the CPU next, can get overwritten there, and you can thus control the program. But where you want it to execute next would change based on the platform. So if you were using a public exploit, you might have to change that. You'd have to find the return address yourself for your system and change it, or find it in another exploit. And also you'd need to replace the shellcode probably. The shellcode that would be in your public exploit might not work for your system. If it's a reverse shell, it probably wouldn't have the right IP addresses in it to get back to your system. So these would be things you'd need to change. We'll look at an example of that. So I have my Windows XP Service Pack 2 here, and I'm trying to attack it. I found that it has port 445 open. I ran Nessus and it says it's vulnerable to this thing called MS08067. Anyone familiar? Yeah. Yep. So I do a little bit of Googling around for that, and I find on Security Focus or on ExploitDB, I find information about that vulnerability, and I go through here and it has an exploit. Actually, it has a lot of exploits. So I go down here and I look at the public exploits that are available, and I like Python. Python's my favorite, so I would click on the Python. Anybody here like Python? Yeah. Well, what do you like instead? That's it? So I find a public exploit that's Python that'll work on this vulnerability. The problem is, like I said, I need to change some things in here. My shell code here, this would actually work because it's a bind shell, which instead of connecting back to me, will just listen on a port on the box. So like how I found port 445 open, it would open port 4444, and I could connect back. So that I actually wouldn't have to change. But see, it has payload for Windows 2000, and then for Windows 2003 Service Pack 2. Neither of those are what I'm trying to hit with XP Service Pack 2. So I would need to change this exploit in order for it to work. But if I have Metasploit, that's not actually the case, which is a lot of what I use Metasploit for. In Metasploit, instead, I can just load the module in Metasploit that I want to use, and I can look on that website. It did say that there was a Metasploit module, and it'll tell me the name. So I can just load up that module, select my target OS, and in some cases, actually in this case as well, it'll do automatic targeting. It'll query and say, who are you? And when the machine responds back, I am Windows XP Service Pack 2, it will know that it needs to attack that one. So in some cases, you don't even need to know what the target OS is. I select my IP addresses. I say, where do you want to attack? And I give it the IP of the vulnerable system out there. And depending if I want it to connect back to me, I need to give it my own IP as well. I select the payload, which is again what I want it to do when it's done. And then I just send it off. And it takes care of all those offsets and return addresses for me. So this is a good way. If you're on a pen test and you only have a limited amount of time, it's a good way to get things going. Also for testing, if you're trying to write your own exploit, there's no point in doing it if it's not ever going to work anyway. So test it in Metasploit first would be a good way to go. And if you're just getting started, if you want to move into exploit development or pen testing, this is a good way to get your feet wet. I definitely recommend moving on into learning buffer overflows and some more advanced topic. If you enjoy this, we'll even have a class on it. But this is a good way to get started. So you can, by the end of this session today, we will have popped our first box, so to speak. We will have exploited a system. And you might not necessarily be able to learn quite as quickly and move on if you weren't using something like Metasploit. So interacting with Metasploit, there's a few ways to do this. I prefer MSF console, which is what we're going to look at today mainly. There's also a command line interface that is good for scripting, but it doesn't have a lot of the functionality that you see in console. So we're definitely going to work with console, and that's what I would recommend if you're going to use Metasploit, to use the console. There was a web interface and a GUI. They're not around anymore. You can actually find the web interface in Framework 2 and backtrack. If you notice, instead of using Framework 3, you could go back to the old framework, and the web interface is still there. It's a good little interface. I use it for if I'm doing shell code and putting it into an exploit. It has a really good interface for setting all that up. So you can still use it in Framework 2, but it's not part of the trunk anymore, and the GUI is gone entirely. However, it's been replaced in a way. There is Metasploit Pro and Metasploit Express, which are tools that are created by Rapid7, who now owns Metasploit. But Metasploit, the regular version, is still free and is still maintained by the community. You can still add any modules you want to it. So it's really been a great thing because they do have these available if you're a professional pen tester and maybe your customers would like to see a tool with support by a company. You can use Metasploit Pro and Express that have nice GUIs and good support, and a lot of your auto-pwn features have moved it into there. But still, every day in your life, you can use regular Metasploit and get the core functionality. And also there's Armitage, which you're going to see today right after this class, which is a really cool GUI that's also free that Raphael Mudge wrote for Metasploit. So we're going to see that a little later. So let's look at the MSF console. If you're in your backtrack machine, or if you're not using backtrack, then open Metasploit and let me show you. So I'll go in my backtrack VM. And if you used mine, then it's just the default login, root, and root backwards tour. And then when you get in, you can say start X. Just makes it a little prettier. And we give it a minute. And we open up the shell. That is bad video drivers and audio drivers and VMware in general. But that sounded like the login for Ubuntu in like 5 milliseconds or less. Okay, so now that I have a shell, I would want to change the directory to, basically you can think of backtrack as Ubuntu with a directory called pentest, which you wouldn't see on a normal system, but this is backtrack. Not on top of having Metasploit, has lots and lots of pen test tools. So I would recommend it if you want to get into pen testing, just to hang out and backtrack and check out the tools it has. So instead of setting them up yourself, it'll already be set up for you. For instance, next week we're going to look at information gathering and vulnerability scanning, and we're going to use Dratus to keep track of our information. Setting up Dratus can be a bit of a pain. It has a lot of dependencies, yeah. And here in Backtrack, it's already set up for us. So we go to pin test, exploits, and then framework, spell it correctly, framework 3. And we change to that directory. Can everybody see this okay? Okay, good. And then once we're in there, we do our / for this directory, MSF console. And hit enter, and that will take us into the console. It is loading up all the modules, so it may take a second. And it also does a custom little ASCII art, or sometimes it's a cow, but it does a piece of artwork every time. It's kind of worth looking at. So while that loads up, let's look at some commands we can use. Metasploit has a command called help, so if you ever get lost, you can always just say help and it will help you out. Depending on where you are, it'll give you a different screen. It'll give you help based on what you're doing. It kind of guesses. It also has connect, which is kind of like netcat. Additionally, anything, you're still in your regular shell as well. So if, say, you don't know your IP and you need to know it, you can just say ifconfig and it will still work. And you're still in Metasploit. So you can run all your normal commands as well. There's also load, unload, and load path. That's if you're working on Metasploit yourself or you're trying to test your own module, you can just load it from your home directory or something, a module you wrote. So you can load in additional things on top of what's already in Metasploit. And there's route. Route's actually pretty cool. Think about it. Here at your office, right, you have your boxes that are your workstations. Those aren't necessarily routable from the internet, right? Hopefully. Only things like web servers that actually have a reason to be routable from the internet, you should be able to see ports. So if I were conducting a pen test on an office, that would be what I would see externally, is their websites, and then I would have to start there. But if I found the vulnerability on one of those systems and then had a session and could interact with it, then that system may be able to speak to the internal systems like your employee desktops. So that's where I would use route. I would say route all the traffic on this subnet through session 1, my session to that web server. And then I could try and run exploits against the boxes internally. So route's pretty cool. You can think of it as a pivot. So a way to get a foothold farther in. I didn't actually know about this until I started writing this course outline thing, and you can actually drop into a Ruby interpreter inside of Metasploit. So I guess the one guy who knows Ruby might use that, but I never have. So if you ever want to program in Ruby inside of Metasploit, IRB will do that. There's also jobs. It'll show, and you can also terminate your running jobs. You might do something that does like an autopone and it loads a lot of things at once. For instance, if you're doing something client-side, you might not know which browser is going to show up. Somebody could show up with Internet Explorer versus Firefox, and the same exploits aren't going to work. So you load them all up at once. And you might want to take some of them down. You would say jobs that would show you everything that was running, and you could stop them, start new ones, anything you wanted. But what we really want to get into, right, is exploitation. So right after this, it's going to show, we're actually going to walk through exploiting a system. We're going to actually exploit that Windows XP box Service Pack 2 with MSO 8067, as we looked at. But let's just look at a little bit of the terminology. If you're on the email list, I sent you a cheat sheet that has all this information. If you're not, let me know after the class, and I will get you signed up so that you get anything future. But every week I will have a cheat sheet of everything that we cover commands-wise, so you can practice. And also the slides will be available afterwards. But first is use, and I say use module. There's all these modules out there, the exploits and the auxiliary modules, and I say, for instance, use MSO 8067 net API. That will tell Metasploit, I want to use this exploit. That's what we're going to work with. So I just say use, and then the module name. I don't need a semicolon or anything. I just hit enter. And then set, this says x equals x, but I'm setting a parameter to a certain value. That's why people, okay. It doesn't, the little brackets kind of imply that the equals isn't really there, but there is no equals. You just say set, and then the parameter, and then a space, and then what you want to set it to. An example, if the remote host. If I'm attacking a host, I say set our host for remote host, and then the IP address, which in this case, I need to remember because I need to give it to you guys. And then after we've set everything, we also have show. For instance, show exploits. We'll show all the exploits that are loaded. If we're inside of an exploit, if we've already said use such and such an exploit, we can say show targets, and it'll show us every sort of box we can hit with it, XP or Windows 2003 or a Linux system even. And then show options is another good one. That'll show you all the options for your loaded module. And once you've got everything set up, you just say exploit and off it goes. Here's an example. This is in your cheat sheet as well. And again, these will be up, but I guess I meant to print out cheat sheets for you, but our printer's broken. So here's an example. We don't really know what the name of the exploit is, so say we can do search. That doesn't need to have a capital. My slideshows apparently want everything to be capital. They want me to use correct grammar. But you can say search and you give it a string. Say I know how Metasploit is set up, that it starts with Windows and Linux and Unix. And so I know it's a Windows exploit and I know it hits SMB. So I would search for Windows SMB and it would give me all those exploits and I would be able to choose the one I wanted. If I know the name, I can just not search for it at all. To make sure it's the one I want, I say info and then the exploit name, and it'll give me all the information about it. And then if I decide that's the one I want, again I say use and then the exploit name. And I would say we are going to run through this together also, so don't worry if I'm speaking a little quickly. And then I would say show payloads. So it would show me everything I could do. Now that I'm exploiting the system, I can get a reverse shell, I can put up a message box, I can change the administrator's password, I can do all sorts of things. We're actually going to do a reverse shell today, but one of your exercises will be to play around with other payloads, see what else you can do, because there are a variety of options in Metasploit. And so I would set the payload, I would choose the one when I just said show payloads, and it would show everything that works for this. Like Linux and Windows have different payloads, and it all depends on how much space you have, really. With a buffer overflow, like I said, you know, it overflows the buffer, but there's only so much space. It'll get stuck. So it's how much space we have to put our information in. A really complex piece of shell code for the payload just wouldn't be able to fit if you've only got like 200 bytes or something. So then you'd have to do something smaller. We've got a fair amount of space here, and we have a lot of options. And then now that I've chosen the payload, I say show options, and it'll show both the payload and the exploit have some options. Like you have lhost for localhost. If you choose a reverse shell, you'll need to know where to connect back to. If you don't choose something that needs to connect back, you won't have that because it doesn't care. So it will add some new options when you choose a payload. So I would set my lhost to my localhost, set my other options, and then once everything's set, I would say exploit. So let's look at how to do that. So yeah, I'm still in MSF console from before. Nothing's changed. I'm just keeping off where I did. So I'm actually going to search. I remember from here where we were looking online, I found this vulnerability. It actually says here, it talks about MS08067 being the name for it in Metasploit. So I searched for that. Really need to make my desk a little taller. So it's MS08_067. Well, let's just leave it at that. And I search for that, and it'll search all the loaded modules for that string. So if I know part of the name, or say I know I want to attack MySQL, I can just say search for MySQL, and it will pull up everything that has MySQL in the name, so anything that has to do with it. So I can use search if I'm not quite sure what I want to do yet. And here it is. That's the only one with MS08067. Not surprising, because that was the name of it. So then what do? I say, well, first let's say info. Let's make sure that's the one we want. So I just type in info, and then that name. I can copy it and paste it or type it in. I'm going to go ahead and type it in. So it's Windows, and then /SMB MS08_ 3 times the charm 067 net API. And it gives me all the information. It tells me lots of things. It tells me the platform and how good it is. Great is a really good score. That's why we use this one. It hits a lot. And it's kind of thought of as the demo exploit because it never fails. Well, I say that, and you know I'll be the first one to make it fail. True story, when I was testing this for the Thursday class, I could not for the life of me get it to work, and I thought something was wrong with my SP2 box, so I loaded up Windows XP Service Pack 0. It still didn't work, at which point I realized something was really wrong. Network, exactly. John is correct. The network was incorrect. My backtrack box was on the NAT network, and my XP box was on the bridge network, so needless to say, that would not work. But luckily there was nothing wrong with the boxes, so class could continue. Tells us who wrote it. H.D. Moore wrote this one. I said in the Thursday class, and I'll say it again, if I could have written one exploit ever, it would have been this one, because it's the one everybody uses. So, oh, actually, yeah, H.D. Moore and Brett Moore both worked on this, so props to them. You're cool. And it gives me all the available targets. I know I want Windows XP Service Pack 2 English, and I see that here. And I also see that it has automatic targeting. Up here is target 0, so I know that it can target for itself, figure out where it's targeting, and I know that it can target the machine I need. So I know this is an exploit I can use. And then it shows its other options. Our host is not set. That's something you need to set yourself because it needs to know where to go. That's remote host. It can't really set that for itself. And it gives you a description and some references. So based on that info, we can decide if that's what we want to use. And I say yes, that's what we want to use. So does anybody remember what we say? We have to load it first, John. Use, exactly. So now I say use, and then that exploit name again, MSO8 underscore 067, net API. No. Windows SMB, MSO8 underscore 067, net API. And then see that our little bar here has changed. Now we're working inside that exploit, and it tells me what we're using. So we've already seen the targets, but we can just show them again if we didn't say. And it'll just show me again all the targets that are available. This one has a lot, but it does have ours. And let's show payloads. That'll show us all the payloads that will work for this exploit. A lot of them. But it'll only choose things that work for Windows and will work in the amount of space that it has. Quite a few here. We'll talk a little bit about the kinds of exploits in the slides later, but we want to use a payload called Meterpreter reverse TCP. Meterpreter we're going to talk about in depth, but Meterpreter is like a shell and then some, but has some extra functionality in it. But right now we just want to exploit. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so let's set my payload to Windows/Meterpreter/reverse underscore TCP. So that's a Windows payload, that's a Meterpreter payload, and it's going to be a reverse TCP connection. Everybody got that? Okay. And then again, we just hit enter. Yeah?
Which one was it again?
It's a Windows Meterpreter reverse underscore TCP.
Reverse underscore TCP.
And then once we hit enter, that will set our payload. Let's show all our options, and it'll show the options for the exploit and the payload. So see again, our host is not set, but it is set to required. So we do have to put something there. That's our remote host. You can see how it wouldn't work if it wouldn't know where to go, definitely. So our port is already set. In Windows, our SMB listens on 445. If it's set up funny and it needs to be somewhere else, we can set that, but it's set to the default right now. Is Carl still on the roof?
Yep.
Okay. And then down here for the payload options, we see lhost, which is localhost. Since we're connecting back with a reverse shell, we would need to set that to our own local IP. Well, I'm not sure what my local IP is. Actually, I probably don't even have networking. Let me start my networking real quick. If you're in Backtrack, it doesn't automatically start your networking when you load it up, but this is just Ubuntu, which is the Debian kind of flavor. So etc init.d networking start will put up your interfaces and run your DH client. So let's do it real fast. Again, that just shows anything that we can do in our regular shell, we can still do it inside of Metasploit. We don't have to get out of Metasploit or start another shell. So what did we get? So we do if config, and we see 172.16.0.170. No, don't attack my backtrack box, though I did write our capture the flag scenario that we're going to do at the end of the class is actually going to, everybody's going to have a backtrack box and it's going to be in play. So if you want to practice and see if you can find exploits that will work on backtrack, you can work on that because it is going to be in play. So then I would set my local host to that. That's where it needs to call back to. The one you want to hit is actually the Windows XP Professional, not the backtrack. Because for obvious reasons, this being a Linux system, MSO 8067 Net API would not work. No, it's not even listening on the correct port, I do not believe. And then I would set our host. So again, for this, it's just set and then a space and then the option we want to set, in this case, lhost, and then a space, and then the parameter, what we want it to be, which in that case is our local IP. So you're actually not going to put in the same thing as me. You're going to put in your own local IP. So if config, if you're using Windows, you would want to do IP config. And then we also need to set the R host. I would say do not set all your exploits off at the same time as me. I asked and someone told me that actually probably we could have as many sessions there is in this room on MSO 8067, but let's make sure mine works first. And then you guys can start doing yours. And there will be time when we get done, I'll leave it up so we can all go and practice this if you don't get a chance. So I just give it for our host, my Windows XP IP, which I have written. No, I did these backwards. That one I want to be 171, and this one I want to be 170. But again, your lhost needs to be your own system's lhost. So then I show my options again just to make sure everything is set. And I see it filled in our host with my address I gave it. It also filled in lhost. So it looks like everything is set. Then I say exploit. You guys hold off a moment.